everything you need to know about Jameson is either in the bottle or on the label. Beginning with the name. John Jameson is our founder, and just underneath the name you'll see our family crest, and just beneath that, our family motto, Sine Metu, which is the Latin for without fear. Now that phrase defines John and has defined our whiskey ever since. We like to push the boundaries at Jameson. Ever since the first day, John Jameson triple distilled our whiskey, putting taste at the heart of everything that we do. Now there are many characters in the Jameson story, but there's only one founder. It all began when an enterprising John Jameson set up shop on Smithfield in the north side of Dublin. And Dublin was in the midst of a boom, and its population was growing dramatically. It was the second largest city in Britain and Ireland. And at the time, there were over 100 breweries and distilleries throughout the city. Many of those would fade away in due course. Now, few may have guessed it at the time, but Dublin had just gained an institution that would remain on its city's north side more than 2 centuries later. John Jameson's Distillery on Bow Street. Now here comes the man himself. That is John Jameson and his lovely wife, Margaret. 2 people who shared a taste for adventure. And with a little hard work and innovation, the distillery grew. And so did their family. These 2 crazy kids had 16 children. And in time, one of their sons, John Jameson II, took over as master distiller, and the distillery continued to grow. John Jameson II builds on the legacy that his father had imparted to him of hard work, innovation, and unmatched quality. Now by 1820, the distillery looked like this, and between 1880 and 1905, the distillery was running on all cylinders. Now, the Jameson name is the one on the label, but the legacy of our whiskey is truly shared. If you look closely at each and every bottle of Jameson, you'll find 2 barrel men. There's one on the back of the neck here, and there's one hidden on the bottom of the bottle. And these 2 men carrying barrels on their backs represent the hard workers, both past and present, who built our whiskey from the ground up. When you get right down to it, our story is told by the barrelmen. Now, Bow Street was like a city within the city of Dublin. It was a bustling place filled with highly skilled craftspeople. In fact, the Jameson Distillery was so self-sufficient that if you look at the wage books in our archives, you'll find carpenters, millwrights, painters, blacksmiths, and even ostlers. Ostlers are the gentlemen there taking care of the horses. Now, they all took great pride in their work. John Jameson and Son had a reputation for being excellent employers. Once you had a job there, you generally had a job for life. At its peak, the Jameson Distillery employed 300 people, thus supporting hundreds of families throughout Dublin. And by the late 1880s, Jameson was producing 1 million gallons of whiskey every single year. That's $6.5 million each year. In the 1880s, it was no small feat. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of our time together the tradition of the daily grog. A glass of whiskey given to workers at the beginning and the end of every workday. However, if you had what was known as a dirty job, you were entitled to an extra glass. So while mucking up the horse stalls or cleaning the chimneys might be especially messy, you were handsomely rewarded. Enterprising employees looking for a little bit of an extra sip might roll around in dust or dirt before presenting themselves to the foreman and saying that they too had a dirty job. Others enjoyed a spot visit. Now, one of the very first things that a new Jameson employee was taught was to never, under any circumstances, light the gas flame underneath the teapot in the tea room. Managers knew there was whiskey hidden in there somewhere, but they could never seem to find it. Each and every morning, the innocent tea kettle was filled with fresh-baked whiskey, and workers would pop in throughout the day for a refreshing cup of tea. Now, just like we do at our Bow Street Distillery, everybody's going to have a chance to taste a little whiskey today, but I promise nobody's rolling around in dirt or dust or sneaking it from a teapot. Always nice to have a little taste of life back in the day. John Jameson and Son had begun shipping its Irish whiskey all over the world. More and more people were enjoying the triple distilled smoothness and incomparable taste. Sadly, time and history, in the form of military and political turmoil, intervened. War broke out around the world not once, but twice. There was conflict within Ireland as well. Due to its prime location, our Bow Street distillery became a fortress during the 1916 Easter Rising. Now, despite the troubled times, Jameson generosity prevailed. Due to the imposition of martial law, none of the workers could gain access to the distillery for 2 weeks. But if we consult our wage books in our archives, it shows that everyone was paid their full wages during the shutdown. Just when things looked like they might start picking up again, progress was halted by the imposition of restrictive trade tariffs by Britain and the effects of prohibition here in the United States. American bootleggers actually used to label their product Irish whiskey, label their moonshine as Irish whiskey so that they could charge more for it. And the damage to our good name and the lack of progress seemed insurmountable. And by the 1960s, the Irish whiskey industry had reached rock bottom. Drawing on the legacy of John Jameson's spirit of innovation, the guardians of the whiskey that bears his name decided that it was time to sink or swim. And other Irish whiskey makers had come to the same conclusion. So in 1966, after centuries of rivalry, Jameson joined forces with John Power and Sons and the Cork Distillers Company to form the Irish Distillers Group, also known as Whiskey's Big Three. And this is a group that still stands proudly today. While the spirit of Jameson lives on in Dublin, where John Jameson perfected the art of whiskey making, the heart now lies in Middleton, in the south of Ireland, where our product is distilled and matured to satisfy the growing global demand. Now, Middleton is the perfect place to make the highest quality tasting Irish whiskey. Our heritage of hard work and innovation continues. Our whiskey is steeped in craft and legacy, but our whiskey maker masters in Middleton are always exploring new techniques and new ingredients to reflect the growing taste of today's whiskey drinkers, like all of us. Jameson is truly a people story. It's about the barrelmen, it's about the makers, and it's about the masters who are dedicated to living up to 242 years of heritage. And it's about all of us who enjoy the smooth taste of Jameson Irish whiskey. We are all the barrelmen. John Jameson began our story on Bow Street, and it's up to all of us to continue it today. It all comes back to taste. One sip, and you'll know exactly why. That concludes our history lesson for today. So we're going to move subjects. We're going to go from history on over to science, where we're going to learn a little bit more about what goes into making each and every bottle of Jameson Irish whiskey. Whiskey making is a combination of art and science. And our masters in Middleton oversee many different processes that go into making each and every bottle. But today I'll break it down into 3 key steps. The first is preparing our quality ingredients. Now, the word whiskey derives from the Irish ishkabaha. You can kind of hear it, ishka, sort of turned into whiskey. And ishkabaha means water of life. The Dungorny River that flows through our Middleton distillery is the life source of our whiskey making operation. The second ingredient needed to make great whiskey is barley. And we generally use barley that is grown within 100 miles of our Middleton distillery. We also use premium non-GMO corn or maize, but we import that from France. As anybody who has already visited Ireland may know, we don't get quite enough sunshine in Ireland to grow our own corn. Jameson is one of only a handful of whiskeys in the world that is produced using 2 different types of barley. The first is unmalted. Now, unmalted barley is simply barley that is taken straight from the field and goes straight into production. It's still intact with the husk, so it's incredibly hard. And the use of the unmalted barley imparts that creamy, mouth-coating texture that you associate with Jameson, and it's also going to add a little bit of spice. Now it would follow that if the first type is unmalted barley, the second type must be malted barley. Malted barley is produced in a malt house, where it is soaked in water and then kept in humid conditions for up to 5 days to start the germination process. Basically what we're doing there is we're just tricking the barley into thinking that it's spring, so that it will start to release the sugars and the enzymes needed for fermentation. Then we're going to add a little bit of heat to stop that germination process, leaving those sugars ready for us to use. So now that's malt, dried, germinating barley. When we made whiskey at our Boat Street location, we used traditional malting tiles in a traditional malting house, just like the ones right on the center of your tables there. Now these aren't hot, so you're safe to touch them, run your hands over them. You can feel the different holes in there, and that's where the clean hot air would have come up through to dry the barley. And just underneath that, you've got examples of both malted and unmalted barley. And get your hands right down in there. Start with the unmalted barley. Don't eat it, it's incredibly hard. I don't want anybody headed off to the dentist on my account. But you can roll it around in your hand. You should get a little bit of a grassy aroma from that unmalted barley. And then there's a little slot there to the left of your barley. You can pop any used barley in there. And then move over to the malted barley. You'll notice if you roll that around in your hands, it's much softer, might break apart a little bit. And if you get your nose right down to it, it'll smell a little bit like cookies or biscuits. Now we want to maintain the clean characteristic of our barley. So when we heat it on those malting tiles, we use clean, hot air. Some of our friends over in Scotland will burn turf or peat when they kiln their barley. And that's going to give it that smoky flavor that we generally associate with Scotch. We've got a couple more steps in our first preparing of our ingredients. First, we're going to take our grain and we're going to mill it into grist. Then we're going to add water and heat it in a mashing process. What we're doing there is just simply trying to extract as much of the flavor and the sugar as we possibly can. We'll filter that mash into a liquid called wort and then add yeast. Now yeast is going to go to work right away, eating away at all of those sugars, producing carbon dioxide and, most importantly, everybody's favorite, alcohol. Now this is a process called fermentation, and it results in a type of distiller's beer known as wash. It's about 10% alcohol by volume. If you've ever visited a brewery, this is a very similar process. You've ever seen those big vats that have got that very foamy top, that real strong aroma. That's wash. But we're not making beer at Jameson, we're making whiskey. So on to our second step, distillation. So up here you'll see 3 pot stills and 3 column stills. Through repeated trials and tastings, John Jameson developed our signature trickle distillation process. Here's how it works. We're going to take that wash and put it into this first still, the wash still. Add heat and bring that to a boil. And the vapors that rise are incredibly high in alcohol, allowing them to escape the neck, leaving the water behind. Now their freedom is short-lived. They'll be processed through a condenser and returned as liquid. Take that distillate, and we'll move on to our second still. This is called the Fane still. Now the distillate that we received here is getting much closer, but it still didn't have that smoothness that John Jameson wanted. He found that by distilling 3 times, it makes the whiskey twice as smooth. So on to our third and final distillation in the spirit still. Now by using these old-fashioned copper pots for our malted and unmalted barley, we've created what is known as pot still whiskey, or the quintessential type of Irish whiskey. At our Middleton Distillery, we also make a second type of whiskey called grey whiskey. And this is made with the malted barley and maize. And this goes through a much more efficient and modern process known as column or continuous still distillation. I'll draw your attention back to your tables. On the lower left-hand corner of your table, you've got the distilling station. And if you want to pick up one of these little white cards, and everybody's going to get to act as if you were in your favorite perfume shop or testing out your favorite cologne. Now, the atomizers on the table don't actually lift, but you get your card right down on there and start on your right-hand side with the pot still atomizer. Give it a spray, and then a little wave around will let some of the alcohol evaporate. And then get your nose right down in there. From the pot still, you'll get a very robust smell, and you'll get a real sense of the barley. You can kind of smell, it smells a little bit like barley. Same little slot there, right to the right of your cards. Pop those away. And you can do the exact same thing with your column still atomizer. Now this is that more efficient, modern process. And with the column still atomizer, you're going to get the grain whiskey flavor will be much more floral and light and delicate. And we want all of these characteristics in our final product. So when we blend our whiskey for the end of the process, we're going to use both the grain distillate and the barley distillate. So now we've got this great spirit. We're ready to move on to our third and final step, which is maturation. For the maturing Jameson whiskey, we use two different types of casks. From America, we get American whiskey or bourbon barrels, and from Spain, we get sherry barrels. Now, their previous employment allows them to pass on part of their personalities to our whiskey. So again, if I can draw your attention to your maturation station down in the lower right-hand corner, you've got two different caps there. You've got a bourbon barrel and a sherry barrel. You can pop that cap off of the bourbon barrel. You can smell the cap, or you can get, for the brave among you, you can get your nose right down to the barrel and get a sense of the bourbon or the American whiskey. What you'll get there is probably very, very sweet. A lot of vanilla, a little bit of the toasted wood. And then you can move on over to the sherry barrel. And this will be a completely different characteristic that it adds to our whiskey. From the sherry barrel, you should get nuts and figs, dried fruit. Always reminds me a little bit of Christmas. So we'll take our grain distillate and our barley distillate, and we will age them in separate barrels. There is a great amount of give and take between the wood and the spirit. The reactions that occur in the barrel give the whiskey its true characteristics. One more time, just draw your eyes back to your tables. You'll see in the beakers there, you go from new make, 1 year, 3 year, 7 year. And you'll notice that they get a little bit darker as they take on more and more characteristics of the wood. But you'll also notice that there's a little bit less as time goes on. We lose 2% of our whiskey every year to what's known as the angel's share. Now 2% might not sound like a whole lot, but it comes out to 33,000 bottles every single day, or a bottle every 3 seconds. So we like to think that we have many, many happy angels flying around. As you can see behind me, the whiskey is ready to be blended and bottled and ready to be enjoyed. So I think it's time to head upstairs and let the whiskey do the talking for itself. If you'll follow me, we can head on up to our tasting. Everybody watch their eyes, it's still bright outside. Watch your step on the stairs.
Oh, that's exciting. Sorry about the bad signal. I don't know. All of a sudden, didn't have any huge obstacles or thick walls, but hopefully here on the second floor is going to be flawless. Thank you for your patience as always. Hi, Peter Rock and Tackle World.
Or taste the Black Barrel or the Jameson Orange. So one of those three. If you'd like to do the tasting here, please just take your ticket and pop it right down on the table and we'll pour it for you, please. Yes, if you'd like to do one of the other ones, you're welcome to stay and listen.
Jameson or the Jameson.
Yeah, so it entitles you to one of the three.
No, natural here.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sure. Yeah, you can go right on back and yes, absolutely. If you've still got your ticket, the Jameson Orange or the Jameson Black Barrel, yep, at the other experience. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That was very good.
Oh, thank you so much. So yeah, anybody who wants to do the tasting here, just pop your ticket down on the table and we'll come around and pour it for you.
I guess we should do it now.
It is neat, so it's just Jameson neat. So sure. The black barrel. The two other options are the black barrel or the ice cream. It's unreal. I need it in my freezer. I'm dying.
Okay, it's up to you. Do you want it or not? There's other options.
And
Alright.
we will say rest in
Everybody
peace,
who's
Fang,
still
again.
have a little bit of whiskey in front of them. Still deciding.
Ready, you gotta take it?
Yeah, we're good
No, you're
here.
good.
No, she's gonna do the presentation.
Okay, perfect.
Guys, good?
Oh, you?
Okay.
Yeah, you've got it. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everybody. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our glasses, for those of us who are tasting, hold them up, tilt them to a 45-degree angle, and give them a little bit of a roll around, and then return it to level. You should see that you've left a bit of a film around the inside of the glass. There it is. A little bit of film around the inside of the glass, and there's just droplets that will start to form. Does anybody know what those are called, but on a wine tasting? Oh, you know it.
I know it, but I can't.
You know it. In America, we call those the legs. Just little droplets that start to form. But Ireland is a little bit more poetic than we are, and they call those the tears in the whiskey. So they call those the tears. And next time you're in a bar or a pub, if you want to show off a little bit, a lighter-bodied whiskey will form tears more quickly, and they'll drop down the side of the glass more quickly. Whereas a heavier or more oily-bodied whiskey will form them more slowly, and they will drop down the side of the glass more slowly. Jameson Original, that you have in your hand there, is a medium-bodied whiskey, so you get quick tears and some slow tears. Next up, we're going to smell our whiskey, and there is a very specific way to do this. You're going to get your nose right down in the glass and leave your mouth open. You should actually be able to almost taste the whiskey when you're smelling it, so keep leaving your mouth open allows it to pass all the way onto your palate. And if you feel a little silly, we'll do it right along with you, I promise. So get your nose right down in there, and your mouth open. And if you can't quite put a finger on what you're smelling, there's some words there on the table in front of you. It's always really sweet to me right off the bat. Anybody else get sweet or spicy in particular? Spicy? Hits you first? Yeah, absolutely. Now the spiciness, as you might remember from downstairs, comes from that unmalted barley, so that really hard unmalted barley. Whereas the sweet comes from the malted barley or the corn or the maize. All right, here we go. Best part, ready to taste. Generally, when tasting whiskey, you want to leave it on your tongue for 1 second for every year that the whiskey was matured. So on average, our Jameson Original is matured for 5 years. So go ahead and take a sip and leave it on your tongue for about 5 seconds. Smooth, sweet, really sweet. So you got the spicy on the inhale and then the sweet on the tongue. Yep, absolutely. You'll notice that it's a very smooth drink that comes from our third distillation process, that's triple distillation. No wrong way to enjoy Jameson. We're drinking it neat today. It goes great on the rocks, a little bit of water, or in your favorite cocktail. I'm an old-fashioned girl. I always like my Jameson in an old-fashioned cocktail. So if you'd like to continue the experience today, you've got your phones out. There are some QR codes on both ends of our table here. Those will point you to some local bars, but Jameson's pretty ubiquitous, so any liquor store or pub, you should be able to find Jameson. So for those of us who are drinking, we can go ahead and finish off our Jameson with a cheers to the barrelmen everywhere. I'd like to welcome you all to the Jameson community with a Sine Metu on 3. 1, 2, 3. Sine Metu. Sunshine.
Rest in peace, Fang.
I will be hanging around downstairs. If you have any questions, we'll exit out that same door and take the stairs down to our left, where you'll pass our gift shop. You'll get some exclusive Jameson NYC merch, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
joining.
much.
We really appreciate it.
I was actually enjoying it.
Oh, good. Yeah, there you go. Well, now I have all kinds of information to show off.